So it's day 3. I'm in Keralan looking at the palliative care services. Yesterday I had my first outpatient experience. I met a man who had travelled 75 kilometres on the behalf of his mother, who has become increasingly housebound, frail, incontinent. And he came in for a first assessment. After meeting the receptionists, he comes through into the clinical room where he meets a social worker, which is standard practice at Pallium. And after filling out some forms, we begin filling out a family tree. I think this is odd. It feels like an odd time to try and diagnose a genetic disorder, but I suspend my disbelief and watch on. This is not an ordinary family tree. In the family tree is an articulation of the relationships which are important in his mother's life. How close, how far, are people still married? And we spent almost 10 minutes doing this. And I think that's really interesting. The first 50 minutes of this person's experience with Pallium was spent talking about relationships. But then we were interrupted. Please, doctor, come outside. So we all left our seats, the patient included, or the person included, and I'll show you what happens next. So yeah, wonderful to enjoy those birthday celebrations. I've spared you from my rather enthusiastic happy birthday singing. I looked around and the man was actually behind me in the clinic room, also joining in the celebrations. But I think it raises a really interesting point about what our primary focus is when we're dealing with people at the end of life. It's so easy, I think, in general medicine to become organ-focused, problem-focused. It's how we're taught, isn't it? You have a problem, you try and break it down. When did it start? Where is it? What makes it worse? What makes it better? But when we're nearing the end of life, how often have we seen it in hospital? A person's been in hospital for 3 months, and day after day after day, they are asked, they experience that same problem-focused attitude. What happens? Well, I'd heard of a person-centered approach. It's what drew me into palliative care, trying to find a person amongst all of the problems, not the problems amongst the person. But I hadn't, until 2 weeks ago, heard of a relationship-focused approach. It's something that Robert Twycross talks about in his lectures about palliative care. And it reminds me of a concept that Alfred North Whitehead, who's a mathematician, philosopher, he wrote Principia Mathematica with Bertrand Russell. He said this, and I'm kind of paraphrasing. He said, an entity is in some ways nothing more and nothing less than a sum of relationships it has with other entities. Which feels quite wordy and abstract, but I think it's quite a deep and important point. In some ways, good isn't meaningful unless there is bad. A father implies a son. Whenever we think of something, it's hard for us to think about it except in its relationship to ourselves. Can we think more about relationships? Yes, that is the question. I'm rambling too much now, but I'll leave you with that. Speak soon.